Welcome to Honest Faith, Hard Questions, an Emerge community podcast and a production of Lakewood Church of the Nazarene. We believe the church is a living community meant to experience new life together, even in all of our messiness. And so we invite you to leave your easy answers at the door and to bring your whole self to the table as we discover a living faith together. So grab a seat. Let's talk.
Welcome back, everyone.
What's up?
Good to have you all back here with us on this fine Tuesday. Hope you guys are doing well this week. We have a very fun discussion for you. We are going to enter into a role reversal because usually when we have one of these episodes, I talk way too much, and I'm not the only one at this table with expertise in a particular area. Mia here is our local and resident worship leading expert. And we've been talking, about the church and the church community, and I thought it'd be helpful to have just an episode that gets into worship just as like a general concept, but also when most people think of worship, I think they think of the worship service as, the prime time spot. It's, it is the main Christian event every week. It's the Sunday morning. It's the, if you're a Christian, this is the thing that you're going to do kind of thing. So yeah, I thought it'd be helpful just to explore that a little bit. And yeah, you have some really good expertise. So will you just refresh all of us on, how you came to have the knowledge that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was born musical, and it has been my favorite thing, literally since I was a baby. According to my parents, I was singing melodies before I could talk. I would memorize VeggieTales CDs in the correct keys that the songs are and sing in perfect pitch at age 2 through the VeggieTales CD. So it's just who I am, a musical person, but I just also have always engaged with God most easily through singing and through playing music. And it's just one of my absolute greatest joys is to sing. And I started leading worship. Well, I started participating on the worship team in church in 6th grade. And then by 7th grade, I started leading our youth group worship band and continued doing that from then on. And when I was 17, for a year, I did an internship at our church as a co-worship leader, and I would lead our adult worship service every other Sunday. And then I graduated high school and I went off to college to study worship arts at Trevecca Nazarene University in Nashville, and spent 3.5 years really diving deep into what worship is, what a worship leader is, and the history of worship in the church, as well as kind of current things for a worship leader to think about when they are choosing songs, when they are working with their worship team, when they are leading a congregation through a worship service. There's so many aspects, and I delved really deep into it during my time at Trevecca and fell further in love with it. And again, it's still for me the most natural way that I commune with the Lord. But I also learned, and we'll talk about this more in this episode, that worship is not just singing songs. It's not just the 3 to 4 songs that we sing in church every Sunday before we sit down and listen to the sermon. Worship is everything we do, and it is actually our very existence as humans. We live to worship all day, every day, all week. And yeah. So we'll talk more about that. But I have almost never ceased leading worship since age 13, I guess. Now I'm 26, so that's 13 years, almost 14 years.
So it's fair to say you've been doing it for a while.
I've been doing it for a while.
As somebody who has led a couple of the congregations that you've been part, and we've had some similar discussions around worship. One of the things I always find really interesting that congregations are looking for is they're looking for authentic worship is one of the words that they'll use, or like genuine worship that's not performative, or that is not like manufacturing or trying to like create an emotional high or experience. I think there's a deeper philosophical question to ask about like how much should we expect an emotional response in worship, because if what we're doing is trying to just respond, there's going to be emotion involved with that, and that's a bigger question for probably a different episode, because that gets into sociology and psychology and all of those things that neither you nor I probably has a ton of. I can speak theologically to it, but whatever. But we've been talking again the past few episodes just about the way that church culture is and how we can kind of pivot away from that. So like, what is it that you're seeing in modern worship culture where there seems to be, at least in my mind, a disconnect where it's like, you have the worship team or the worship band, and then you have the audience or the congregation, and it seems like there's as much distance between them as there is in any given sanctuary. There's usually a nice big spot right up in front, and the worship team is up on a platform, and logistically it makes sense because like you need to be able to see them, but also it does something theologically where it's like we're raising up a certain group of people and they're doing a specific thing. So I don't know. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit your perspective on like modern worship.
That's an amazing question. And yeah, even the word worship now has been co-opted by the culture, by church culture today. And unfortunately, I have fallen into that and contributed to that. But, I just remember back in Nashville in school, among my peers there, we were all studying to become worship leaders. And we were all interning at different churches and, meeting other worship leaders. And especially in Nashville, because Nashville is country music USA. It's a huge music industry hotspot. But there is a worship industry now, and it's a booming industry. It is. And so this word worship, for a lot, when somebody hears it, oftentimes the first thing that pops into their mind is,
Chris Tomlin
or Elevation Worship, or like Maverick City, like these worship teams that seem to have like made it, and they are actually, I heard the statistic a couple years ago that something like 90 or over 90% of the songs churches are singing right now are written by 5 churches, being like Hillsong, Elevation, whatever the top 5, Maverick City, yeah.
Chris Tomlin
probably, right, yeah. But like 5 little worship communities writing over 90% of all of the songs being sung in churches today. So it's kind of become this commercialized entity in our culture. it's become an industry. And I think that has happened alongside just churches moving in this direction of really platforming worship teams. Like stages getting taller and like sanctuaries feeling more like auditoriums that are getting bigger, and music that is getting like edgier and edgier. So worship has become this commercialized industry product thing today. But that is actually not what worship is at all. That is, all of it is, they're just tools that worship leaders are using. The goal is that every person would commune with the fellowship of believers, commune with God. Worship is communing with God, and that is something we are called to do all day, every day. On Monday, when we wake up and brush our teeth and go to work, and come home and play with our kids and tidy up the house and go back to bed. Our whole lives are acts of worship. It's just that on Sundays, we have a tradition of gathering together as brothers and sisters to edify one another, to receive the gospel together, to commune directly with God through prayer, through meditation, through study, through partaking of communion and baptism, and through singing. We love to sing. Humans have been singing and making music in every single culture throughout all of human history. And we love to sing to the Lord. We love to offer that to the Lord. It engages our physical body and our mind, and it really, when you're singing, it takes all of your focus and your energy. It's something we can do together where we're like lining ourselves up. We're lining up the words we're saying and the exact time we're saying it. And it's this way to feel very connected together and give this communal offering of our words through the timekeeping of music. And so it's very bonding for brothers and sisters. And we express our creativity, which is a trait we have as people made in God's image. God is the creator, and He has made us creative. So it's just one way. It's one way that we express our worship. But the industry of the worship industry is not worship. It's this very it's now very sophisticated. We've very much polished the tools and the flows and the order.
The product.
It's become, in many cases, a commercialized product for some churches. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we have to remember what we mean when we use the word worship.
Yeah. There were two things that you said that really caught my attention. One of them is that worship, especially like communal worship, is more than just like a tradition. It's a necessity. Like it's something that we do that is, it feeds both us as individuals, but the community in a way that doesn't happen otherwise. And so we tap into the tradition, but it is a necessary function of worship that we come together and we do those kind of things together.
Yeah. Music is everywhere.
Mm.
And I've never met a human who just doesn't like music. Yes, you do. It's in all the video games and TV shows, and it's playing in the grocery store, and Like,
It's everywhere. Yes.
that's not something that a human just has absolutely no connection with.
Yeah. Well, I guess I was really just pushing on when you started that discussion. You said like we have this tradition of doing that, and it's true we have the tradition, but I think it goes one step further in being.
Yeah. I was trying to add to that.
Yes. And the thing that I found helpful in what you were saying is how, because it's necessary and because it is the way that the community joins together and offers up words and songs in one voice, like it is a necessary form of participation. And I know for me, that's been one of the things that has been very challenging in leading congregations, is that you have people who are kind of like Scrooges when they show up and they're like, we just have to get through worship in order to hear the sermon. And to me, that completely and totally misses the point of engaging in the worship service. There's a great Latin word that describes the church service. It's the word liturgy, comes from liturgos in Latin, and it literally means the work of the people.
Yes.
And like when you show up to the worship service, like you are engaging in this because it is a necessary point of participation to say, I am choosing to join my voice with everybody else. And the person who's up in front, they're called the worship leader because they are going to guide and to direct people as they're singing their different notes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I found that a really helpful distinction that you made here, but that you've made in the past as well. Is we've come up against some of these things, that worship is more than just the music, that it includes the sermon, but it is the participatory part of the service. It's the singing, it's the communal prayer time. It's not just being a consumer of the sermon, but saying like, we're going to engage with it, whether it's taking notes or whether it's asking questions or, like whatever it may happen to be, like we're going to find some way to engage with it. And I know we're going to get to this, but it culminates in communion, this, very hands-on worship experience that necessitates response and participation. Yeah, I just think that's a really important point in thinking about the ways that we're seeing modern trends like start to diverge from that.
Yeah. And also we as Christians find it important to regularly express our gratitude to the Lord for what he has done for us on a weekly basis together through singing is how we like to do that. But it's, like, if you think of like entering into like a marriage and, married couples often come to a point where we realize like, hey, I need to be intentional and purposeful about expressing how much I love my husband. So like, and I'm not good about this myself, but some couples will make like a habitual date night or a habitual, I'm going to write a note and make them a cup of coffee and tell them how much I love them. It's like when you enter into a relationship with someone, it can be easy to like forget to express your love and your adoration for that person regularly. And so the act of participating in singing a song, like this week we're going to sing, Is He Worthy? Is anyone worthy? Is anyone whole? Is anyone able to break the seal and open the scroll? The Lion of Judah who conquered the grave. He is David's root. He is the Lamb who died to ransom the slave. It's expressing these radical things regularly to offer the Lord our worship and our praise. That's another function of it, is being explicit to the Lord, like, Lord, you have done these things, and thank you. And we worship you, and we belong to you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it might be helpful to bring people into the conversation at a slightly deeper level. Because I think when most people think about the church service, they say, oh, the pastor's going to go, they're going to pick a couple of songs, they're going to preach the sermon to us. And like the sermon is the thing that is going to really communicate to us as people. But if what you're saying is accurate, and I think it is, then we actually need like a deeper theology of worship that says, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is how it's all working together in some sense, where, there's a necessary reason that we're singing, there's a necessary reason that we're doing X, Y, and Z that goes beyond just people like it. Or, we might happen to have a tradition of doing this or doing that, but there's a deep theological reason that happens behind all of these different things. So if you were to like build out a theology of worship, where would you start?
Well, I've kind of talked through some of it already, but I mean, for me, it really starts in the idea that we as humans were created in the image of God. We are created in the image of a God who is creative, who is communal, a God who is a God of order. And so, as humans that reflect those traits, that we were made to reveal and reflect what God is like, then everything we do is live like God, live like Jesus, and doing things and saying things that reflect the image of God glorifies him, and it is worship. But also when we fail to do things that are reflective of God and God's character, we actually are still worshiping. We're just worshiping something else. That we are always worshiping something or someone. We were created to be worshipers. We are worshipers, whether we like it or not, whether we're Christians or not. We are worshipers. We are worshiping maybe ourselves. We are worshiping maybe money. We are worshiping, just anything and everything. At all times, we are in a constant state of worship. Another word that is slightly interchangeable is loving. We are always loving something. And so the Christian walk is to realize that no matter what we've been worshiping, no matter how our worship has been reflecting the image of God, or God still pursues us in his prevenient grace and his love. And when we choose to open ourselves up and receive that, our innermost being and after that, our response and our actions and our words begin to be healed by him, begin to be transformed, and we choose to respond by taking actions to better reflect him and to worship him and not anything else.
Before you go on, I want you to unpack something for me, because what I heard you kind of shift to towards the end of what you were talking about was worship is a response, that what we are doing is we are responding to the way that God acts first. And I think, like, when I've thought about worship before, it's, God is going to just be sitting. God doesn't have a butt to sit on, right? But, God is just going to be sitting somewhere, and I'm going to be the one that initiates worship in pouring out praise or thanksgiving. It's kind of that, and my head is stuck in the Bible and in ancient Rome, because apparently men just do that, but I have an excuse because that's what my degree is in, right? But it's the idea that the God, like exists inside of their temple, and like I'm going to be the one that initiates the worship by bringing my sacrifice to them. But what I heard you say was that all people are engaged in worship in some way, and it is really predicated upon what you are responding to, like what you are allowing to shape you, and then also how you are responding to that. Is that accurate? And if so, will you unpack that a little bit more?
Ooh, yeah. So I do think this comes down to a bit of a paradox, and I wonder if you have a way to navigate this paradox, because you are still the expert theologian in the room. I am not. But I do find that and it makes sense to me that humans are worshipers as created in God's image, and that we are always worshiping someone or something. We are always loving something. You're always like working to give to ourselves or to somebody else or to something else. And yet God always initiates worship. So no, we cannot conjure up praises to the Lord. But that's impossible because God has always reached out to us first anyways. He created us. He breathed his breath of life into the first human's nostrils and gave him a name. He pursued us. He pursues us first. From whatever moment of existence began for us, he began pursuing us in love.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because of that, it's impossible for us to give something to the Lord he has not already given us. Our very existence and everything around us is here because of God. But I also think just more than that, God is love and God loves us so much, and God is always working in these incredible ways. On top of having just kind of created us, he also doesn't just leave us here. He is in our midst, and he's working, and he is bringing us blessings. And then, of course, there's the gospel too, what Jesus did on the cross for us. So we, although we are natural worshipers, it is still at the same time also true that God pursues us first. And so our worship to him is still a response always to him.
So what's the paradox?
I think the paradox might be I was just having this question mark of, if we are natural worshipers and we are always worshiping someone or something, how does it not feel like we are the ones kind of drudging it up, conjuring it, the ones giving it?
Okay. So maybe the paradox is something like what we talked about with Bart last week, where the pastor is called to speak a word of God, but the pastor can't speak a word of God. And so they're being called to do something that they cannot do, but they must do it.
Yeah, right.
So in the same way, you're kind of saying that the Christian, the worshiper, is called to offer worship, but it is not necessarily them that is initiating the worship. I can see how that feels paradoxical. The thing that I think I would add into this idea, just from a more philosophical and theological perspective, is that when we talk about worship and when we talk about the human's engagement with worship, we are touching on an idea of how do we understand who or what God is. Because I think when we have this frame and this understanding of God is this being that is completely separate from me, like you are a being that is completely separate from me, by saying you initiate worship for me is saying that you are doing something external to me that is then causing or is forcing me to give fealty to you in some way. When we talk about God, we're talking about a being that is both completely and totally other, or the fancy word is transcendent. But we're also talking about a God who is very close, very near. The fancy word is immanent. And so God exists, and this is, I think, part of the paradox of worship is that God is completely other, yet enters into human. That God is initiating worship, yet is also receiving it. And I think, and I think for me, one of the helpful points to remember is that when God is initiating worship, that one, there is this act of prevenient grace. That's God's action inside of the world before you have chosen to do anything. The other thing that I think we see happening is that what worship does is it exposes who or what is determining your value system. Because I think when we talk about like having a relationship with God, both as an individual and as a community, we are not simply saying like, we are going to choose to align ourselves with this particular being in the way that they're doing things. We're saying that we are going to basically let God be the lens through which we see the world. Like everything is going to be filtered through this lens of God and this lens of love. And so that is going to radically determine the ways that we consider how we interact with other people, the ways that we consider, how we should organize ourselves in governing structures or any of these other modes that we choose to organize ourselves. I think it's also getting to worship, it determines what we consider to be appropriate response when something happens or when something doesn't happen. And so you'll sometimes hear people talk about worldview, and I think that worldview it's a way of starting to get at this, but it is a deeper and more fundamental thing. Because worldview says like, oh, my worldview is part of who I am, and it colors the way that I see the world, but this is something even deeper than that, because it says that my worldview, but even my own like vision and sense of self is filtered through this understanding of God's love. And so that's why worship becomes the response. It's saying God has acted, God has moved in such radical ways, both preveniently, but also in ways that I can say, I testify that I have seen the actions of God working. And so my response to that is to give praise. There's also a point of worship that says, I have trusted that God is a God of covenant, that God said that, God will always look out for me and for my community. And when horrible things happen to us, well, now there's a point of worship of response that says, God, what's happening? Where are you? Why are these kind of things happening? Like that is also an intensely important part of worship, is the lament that says things are not the way that they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And again, it's patterned on this response of, God has said that things will be this way. And when I view the world, I see it as beautiful and wonderful and full of mystery and awe and things to find, but I also see incredible brokenness. And my response to those things is birthed out of being able to see those for what they are, that there is beauty and it is mixed in with tragedy. And my response to beauty is praise, and my response to tragedy is lament, and both things are worship.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And what your worship does is it exposes in some sense who or what you are worshiping, because it's the thing that is coloring the way that your response is being done, which I think is a really important point. But worship is also, it's this participatory method of response, where it's not just me sectioning off individually, like what am I doing? But again, it's joining together with people that are saying that, we're giving praise and we're giving lament, because we know it's not just me and God against the world. It's God has created all of us together to do this thing. And so I can give my portion. I can say that, God has shown up in my life in this way, but you also have the the community factor of it as well, where my life, because I am part of humanity the way that God has created it, my life is not just mine. That my actions don't just impact me,
Yeah.
but they impact all the rest of the people that I'm connected to. And especially living in, this church community, my actions have deep impacts on other people. And so being not able, but being willing to put myself into the position and say, I might have reason to offer praise and you might have reason to offer lament, and we can respond with both together because both are legitimately worship. And that, I think, there's a really great biblical scholar / theologian. His name's Walter Brueggemann. Just like we like N.T. Wright, we love Brueggemann around here. Brueggemann talks about the Psalms as being this initial point of worship. And the way that he talks about it is worship is a countercultural act that is actually forming the community. And that, the songs that you sing, the ways that you engage with your praise and with your lament and with your thanksgiving and with all of these different things, like the ways that you do that is going to shape and form the way that your community is, the way that it exists in the world. And Brueggemann was doing it in the sense of saying, like, the Psalms give us a glimpse and an insight into how Israel was being formed and how God was working through some of the ancient Psalms and songs to talk to people. So he talks about things like orientation, which would be offering up praise. He talks about things like disorientation, which would be things like lament and grief and doubt. He talks about a reorientation, which are things like hope for the future. And these are meant to address all of the different forms and facets of individual and communal life, where it's, God, we can give you praise for the great things that have happened. We can recognize that things aren't right. Things aren't the way that they should be. Like, life is disoriented. And so we can offer laments and griefs and doubts. We can also offer hope that there will be reorientation or new orientation that is coming. And all three of these things are mixing together to form the community itself. And so I think that is the engine, like the philosophical engine that's driving worship. It's this question of, how are you viewing God and what is your response to that? Because again, if God is only a distant being that you're offering sacrifices to, then I think we've missed a really important part of the way that God is presented to us as the one who enters into our history and lives among us. But if we only treat God as, this person like buddy sitting next to me, we miss the transcendent portion of it. And so it's this paradoxical give and take.
Yeah.
And it's responding to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's a level of worship almost feels like an impossible thing to really do. Almost the greatness of God and the otherness of God and the radical outpouring of God's sacrificial love to us broken humans. There's a point where we're like, how are we even able to do this? How are we even able to commune with God, to approach God at all in His holiness?
Well, and that's,
Yet we do. Yet we do.
And that's Psalm 8, right? What are human beings that you are mindful of them? Mortals that you would consider them. Yet the psalmist says you have created them to be just a little bit lower than the gods.
Yeah.
They, and the psalmist's view of the heavens is probably different than what we would have now. But the idea here is that you have crowned humans with, I think it actually says you've crowned humans with glory. You've given them dominion over these different things. And so, on the one hand, it's, yes, there's this impossibility. Like, what is humanity that you are mindful of us? Yet there's also a recognition of, like, you have placed us in this awesome and important role inside of there. And yeah, I think that Psalm 8 is a great theology of worship touch point as I've considered it.
Absolutely. every moment of our life, we are being a worshiper of someone or something. And the hope is that by the power of God's Spirit, our every moment becomes more and more in line with an acceptable offering of worship to a perfect and holy God. He's also a forgiving God and a gracious God. And he pursues us even though we are imperfect. It's a miracle, it's a mystery, but it's our hope.
So let me ask you this, because I think we've gotten into the weeds a little bit theoretically, which is good. Which is good.
I had a hard time with it.
Look, I live in the weeds. Like this is where I'm super comfy at.
Sorry if it was confusing for you guys. I got a little mixed up in my speech.
I'm wondering if you can help us, because even if we don't have the whole of the theory, because there are still books being written about all of this stuff.
Yeah.
But the question that I want to ask is, despite not having the theory all completely solidified down, how do we practically engage with this? So Sunday morning, for example, we are going to have a worship service, and we are going to say that Saturday night, our Saturday night service started a couple of days ago. We did it. We did the first one. When we are recording this, it hasn't started yet.
Oh, right.
When this episode comes out, we will have done our first one just a few days ago. So be ready to hear how that turns out. But so, we talk about we're going to be gathering for this worship service. We're going to be offering up our response to God. What are the things that we can look for, or how do we even begin to engage with this idea on a practical level? How does the worship service itself actually meet some of these different requirements for worship that we've talked about?
So I love that question, and that's truly my passion. And so we've established this base theology of what worship is. And I really hope lots of people listen to this episode, because I think there's a lot of people that go to church and go through the motions of a church service, but they don't really know why we're doing everything we're doing in church. This is why. The why is because we are worshipers, and we are hoping that our worship will be made more and more perfect, that we will better and better reflect God's perfect image as image bearers in the world. And God is pursuing us. And so we respond in worship. And when you make the choice to come to church, you are saying, I know, whether it's just that I know that my buddy invited me to church today and I've never gone before, but I've received an invitation and I'm accepting the invitation. I'm going to come to church. The invitation to commune with God in a very important way. So we can commune with God any time of any day, but we do these practices together at church as specific expressions of our worship. So I'll start with the example of the music. Your worship leader will likely lead you to sing a few songs with the group of people you're with the congregation. And as I kind of said before, when we're singing a worship song, we are not okay. Here's a big thing that I am big about that maybe other worship leaders disagree with me on. But from the very beginning of the service, we are responding to God. So starting off the service with singing some songs is not about us warming up to be ready for the real workout, which is the sermon. That is not true. It's not warm-up time. It's not like a time filler. It's not about like just pleasing the people who like music so that they'll come to church and sit down for the sermon. It's not a time for the people who don't care for the music to just get through because they really love the sermon part. It's not an extra thing whatsoever. We are responding to a God who has moved toward us when we did not deserve for that to happen. We are responding to the pouring out of God's Spirit on us and His forgiving us of our mistakes and our sins and blessing us and giving us one another, giving us Christ, giving us hope for a future, giving us life. He gives us life. And so from the very beginning of church, we're responding to this incredible gift that is lavished on us by God.
Would the examples that you're talking about also include we are inviting God into the church?
No.
That's what I mean. Like that's always one that kind of gets me is when people like, yeah, God, we invite you into this. But it's like, no, there's no invitation happening.
Us.
Yes.
God has beckoned us to the sanctuary. We are not what there are some songs out there and I will sing them, but I love this clarification though. We will sing songs sometimes about, Lord, we welcome you in this place. I have a love-hate relationship with those kinds of songs. I think a better way to phrase that is we are making ourselves welcoming to you. But He is already there. And He has gathered us to church. We are not like inviting God into the space. But we do need to make ourselves welcoming to Him. We do need to like lay down our distractions and to fix our attention on Him. I love that clarification. But yes, so the music, again, it is one way that we worship. We love to call it the worship. Probably won't be changing that on a grand scale of churches in America anytime soon. But the music is one way that we worship. It's one way that we respond to God.
I think that is at least a small part of the problem is that when we say worship, people immediately think, oh, we're going to sing songs.
Yeah.
But, again, with what we're talking about, like that's not what encompasses worship. Like worship is not exhausted by singing songs. Like the whole rest of everything that we're doing counts as worship. Yeah.
Yeah, like my job title is worship leader. I have a degree in worship arts, and these titles are referring to being the music leader. So it's a very deeply entrenched misunderstanding.
Oh, very much so. Okay, well, so then we kind of started this branch of the conversation by asking, what are the practical ways that we can begin to engage with this deeper theology of worship? And I think music is like naturally the way that we do that. And so it's easy and it's tempting to just sit inside of that. But, expand that out for us, because I know that you are a worship leader who wants to see the whole big picture. So lay it out for us practically. What is that bigger, grander picture of the worship service that is not exhausted by singing?
Totally. So a worship service, and by that I mean the whole church service, is the way that I like to craft them, structured into 4 rooms. 4 rooms of worship, based on a book called The Worship Architect. I had to read it for school. It's a book for worship leaders that teaches how to craft a church service or a worship service, and viewing a worship service that you plan as like constructing the walls and the furniture, like constructing this place that we're all going to come to and move through together in worship. And this book describes 4 rooms in this house. We'll call it the house of the Lord. But this kind of like theoretical house that we move through. And so the first room is the room of the gathering. And so this includes often a words of welcome for the people and perhaps a call to worship. Somebody will say something or read a psalm or something to say, everybody, the Lord has moved in your life. We are now going to respond to him. And he has poured himself out to you, and we will now worship him in response. And then we will sing. And this all is a part of the first room, the gathering. People are coming together to worship. And the second room is the room of the word. That is the word that the Lord has for the people that day. And that includes like the text, the biblical text, as well as the sermon, as well as any other readings or callings upon the people. Usually it follows the gathering and it's usually wrapped up in the sermon. The word that the Lord has for the people is the second room. The third room we call the table. And the table is the place and the time for the people to respond to the word that they have just received. And the table could include a lot of different kinds of things. Could include the taking of communion. It could include a time of meditation. It could include, I've seen worship leaders that'll like set up a canvas in the front of the room and call the people to come up and like paint something while they pray something. Usually though, it's something that flows naturally out of whatever the word was for that day. A good worship leader will decide what the table will be for that day. That will be a natural response. Anytime a person encounters God, we can't help but respond. We respond. We just do. And then the final room is the blessing or the sending. And it's important to, in an official way, exit the house of the Lord together with kind of a final message, I guess. Michael likes to use a particular blessing. Yeah, but the blessing is the final room. It's an official exit out of the service. So a good worship service, everything in it will be intentional. And so again, there's no part of it where anyone should be just like getting through it to get to the next thing. Every part of it is meant to cause the people of God to engage their physical bodies and their voices and their eyes, their ears, their sense of smell, but also, of course, their hearts, their spirits, their very souls move through and participate in and are transformed by a well-constructed time of worship for the people of God.
So, I mean, it sounds like those rooms are fairly sequential, like they need to happen one right after the other. how does that kind of flow communicate in a way that really, I know you'd said that like it involves the whole response of, you know, of the individual and of the community that's worshiping, but like how does that kind of service communicate in a way that, you know, just slapping some songs in front of a sermon without having any kind of tie-in, or, you know, just saying like maybe we're going to do communion once this quarter, and, you know, like what, just giving a like spur of the moment kind of chance to respond, like how does having these four things patterned out, how does that communicate, or how does that shape and form the community in a way that having it or not having it does? Question was not worded super well, I apologize.
How does the four rooms of worship shape and form the people of God?
Yeah, and like going through the flow of it specifically, because I think, just as I heard you talking, I think that a lot of people in a lot of churches would be able to say like, you know, oh, well, we have all of these different elements of things, but it seems to me that the importance of it is not just in making sure that you have the elements of them, but that you are actually like moving through them as you go through it. Like, you know, you can say that, oh, we have the gathering, like we're all being gathered and we're going to sing some songs. And then, you know, we have the sermon, but like what happens if the table aspect of it is missing? You know, like what is that communicating? Or what happens if the blessing or the dismissal at the end is just like, cool, good to see you next week. Right? Like, you know, what happens if one of those is missing, and why does going through that particularly communicate?
Well, my first thought is I think there can be two different ways to approach structuring a worship service, and one is to just kind of throw some we sing songs because we just do. We listen to the sermon because we just do. We take communion once a quarter because we just do. That there's a lack of intention behind the entire journey that a person coming to that service will be going through. So the other way to approach constructing a worship service is thinking about, from the moment somebody comes into this sanctuary, they are going to go through a spiritual journey for this next hour and a half. And one thing needs to lead to the next, that needs to lead to the next, and lead to the next. And the way that things lead to the next is always, once again, that God moves to us first, and we respond. God moves, and we respond. God speaks, we respond. God moves, we respond. And then at the end, we do need to be sent back out into the world, charged with a mission for that week. So really it boils down to that God moves, God speaks to us first, and we respond. And when I am crafting a worship service, I usually see at least 3 or 4 small ways that small or big ways that is happening all throughout. I like to start with a call to worship that says, God has called you by name to this place. God has moved toward you. We're going to respond now by singing some songs. And then after that, we might read a psalm. God has spoken to us. Now we're going to respond by talking about our offering for today. God is going to speak to us through our pastor's sermon today. God is going to move in a big way. We're going to respond now through meditating and through taking communion. So over and over and over through the whole thing, it's always God moving, God speaking, and us responding.
So I think the last question that I have is just, in thinking about all of those different pieces, is there like a singular tone that you're trying to hit with it? Or is it is it able to fluctuate back and forth? So I guess I'm thinking, we were talking earlier about how things like praise and also lament are both forms of worship. And a lot of times what I see is that what a church will do is they'll have, we're going to show up to the worship service, but they'll say we're going to offer up our praises through song. And I hear a lot more, like 99% of all worship songs are like praise songs. And there are very, very few lament songs. And I've started to see more recently where people will have, like, we're going to do a Blue Christmas service where it's going to be intentionally focused on like lament and grief. But I guess I'm wondering, as you're thinking about the spiritual journey itself, are there ways to shift through it tone wise, or is there space for something like Brueggemann's talking about orientation, disorientation, reorientation, or is it like we're going to focus on one thing specifically and that's going to be what we're doing? Or, like how does a service communicate tonally or thematically in that way?
That's a good question. I have a few thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
I'll start with this. We can always praise God, no matter what the circumstance is. But that is not to say we should not also express our laments and our griefs. But that in those Sundays when there's a Sunday when a couple days before a well-known and well-loved member of the church passed away, and we're all coming together and we're all sad today. That is felt, and like, as a worship leader, to not address that and just pretend like that didn't just happen would be a misfire. I mean, like, would be a dishonest and inauthentic worship service for that day, for this community. I do think we can always sing songs of hope, because we always do have hope. God is always moving towards us. We do have new life and new resurrection in Jesus, always, no matter what, on this side of the resurrection. And I think for many people in their times of grief, that's the last thing they have to cling to. But, and I'll say it again, we can and we should also have songs of lament when that is the natural place that the people of God are in on a certain day. So I think both. I think a good worship leader is aware of where the people of God are at, aware of how God is moving towards them, and crafts a worship service accordingly.
I said that was the last question, and I lied. There's one more. Just as we're getting ready to wrap up, how can listeners, or how can just the church in general, how can we shift our posture on the Saturday night service or the Sunday morning service from like going and evaluating a music performance and saying, gee, I really wish we had done a hymn today or whatever. Like how can we do that to actively entering into communal worship, even when it seems like, it's not speaking to me? Like how do we start to shift our posture where it's saying every week I'm going to worship, not I'm going to evaluate the song and see if it speaks to me and then, act on whatever emotion I happen to be feeling. But how can we move into actively entering communal worship? Like what are some of the things that we can and should be looking for to do that?
Such a huge question. This is where our modern era of consumerism has harmed how people view church and how people view what a worship service is and what it is for. If you are somebody who comes to church who is looking like an experience out of it that is like up to a certain standard for you, based on things that are on the more trivial side. You do want to be attending a church that like has good theology and is spiritually fairly healthy, and those are important things to like look for, and there could be good reasons to church shop, I guess you could say, one or the over the other. But if it doesn't have to do with those fundamental things, if you are allowing yourself to be seriously upset that there wasn't enough hymns today, or there were too many hymns today, or the lights are too bright or too dim, these are trivial things that are harming your like encountering of God for that day. But I just also fear that there is, I don't know, a misunderstanding of what a worship service is for. It is simply somebody has structured a time and a place for you to enter in and to be with God and be with your brothers and sisters in Christ, to hear from Him and then to respond to Him. That is the purpose of it. You don't need a certain kind of like worship band to do that. You can choose to do that if it's just one person on a guitar. Like, you have to choose to do it. And I just think of like Paul and Silas worshiping God in prison, in chains. I mean, are you prepared to do that? With no worship leader, no hymnal, or, no elevation band on the other side, like, no lights. So it was a dungeon. And then I also ask, are you prepared to worship with all of creation in heaven forever? One day as well. I ask that to those people that just don't care for singing the songs at all. Like, do you realize that we're going to be doing that for all eternity? Like, hate to tell you, but anyways, I'm kind of rambling now, but to sum up, I encourage churchgoers, I encourage Christians to really consider what are the important pieces of a worship service and what are the not important pieces. What is more of the fluff on the top that we don't need to worry about so much? What do we need to worry about? We need to worry about, are we hearing from God and are we responding authentically?
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that was great.
Okay.
I think just the last word of wisdom that I would put out there is, if you are somebody who's in a church and you write songs, use your songs in the worship service. We need more community done songs in our worship service. Write music for your community. Let that be something that you do. Righty. Well, we definitely want to put it out to all of you listening here. If you want to jump in the conversation, talk to us a little bit about worship. We've got the comments. It's been super fun engaging with some of you there. Or again, you're welcome to find our email addresses at the lakewoodnaz.org website and send us a little message. We'd love to talk with you guys. But that's all that we have for you this week. Be back next week. We got a real good one coming for you next week. But until then, we will see you later.
Have a great week.